Hi booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Well, I said Aaron here. You can't see me. I'm behind the video, behind the camera for this video, because recently I had an altercation with a wall, which has led to my nose swelling up to twice its natural size. So I thought I'd spare you that sight and instead just show you a pile of books. This is one of these videos where essentially I just want to talk about the random bookish things going on in my head, the reading plans that I have. And so this is a pile of, I think, 16, maybe 15 poetry books that I'd like to read in the near future. They're mostly completely unread. Some of them I've read sort of snippets and selections from them. But these are all, these volumes themselves I'd like to actually finish in the near future. First up, and actually I think the first couple are ones that you will have seen recently, but this one is the Voronezh Notebooks by Osip Mandelstam, translated by Andrew Davis. It's I think he was a poet writing in Russian, and then after the revolution he was arrested and he died in exile. I think I said before that he was executed, but he actually was arrested and died in exile. There's his mugshot on the back, and according to the information on the back here, people tend to say that this is actually one of the best things that he ever wrote, but I think it's also one of the last things that he ever wrote. Next up, a classic that we will have seen relatively recently as well. This is Lucretius on the Nature of the Universe. Just a book generally that I wanted to read, so I've mentioned it in my last sort of wrap up reading update kind of video. So I've sort of talked a fair bit about my intentions for it. I'm very curious to see what it's actually about. And then the last one that is a work of translation. I'm trying to touch base more with poetry originally written in English, because I've been reading a lot of poetry in translation recently, which is cool, but I'm trying to sort of balance it out a bit. But this is Farid Ud-Din Attar, The Conference of the Birds, a sort of allegorical book, I think, about finding God or the absolute, or I'm not entirely sure. I watched a wonderful hour-long video by Mike from Mike Reads the World, where he was talking about this book, and it was really, really wonderful. So I'd recommend that if you're interested in reading this. Then next up, I'm going to use my other hand. We've got A Marginal Sea by Zoe Scalding, a contemporary poet, a poet. If she's not a Welsh poet, she's definitely a poet based in Wales. And so again, it's an area of contemporary poetry in English that I would like to touch base with. I haven't read many contemporary Welsh poets recently. Then we've got William Wordsworth, the major works, including the Prelude. I've really just read selections from Wordsworth so far. I have read all of the lyrical ballads with Coleridge, which I enjoyed on the whole, but I think there's a lot more to Wordsworth than he includes in there, so I'd like to get to more of it. I have sort of flicked through some random Wordsworth poems before, and I've read him in anthologies, but here I've got a bookmark in here for his sonnet composed upon Westminster Bridge, because I think it's one of the most perfect poems ever written, so I keep a bookmark in there for whenever I need to find it. Then next up, we've got some Alice Oswald, Nobody, which is her sort of reworking of the Odyssey by Homer. She did a similar thing with the Iliad, and so then a few years later she did this. So one of my favourite contemporary poets. So I'm excited to see what that's like. Then next up, similar to Wordsworth, a poet that I have read not in translation. I've read in selections, and I'd like to get to know a little bit better. And that's Andrew Marvell, and I've got the complete poems here. I had to read him for my A-levels. I had to read him at university. I think I picked this up when I was in university for a specific module, specific class that I was doing. I don't think I really needed to, because all the poems that I needed by him were already in my Norton anthologies. But now I have the complete Andrew Marvell, so I would like to get to know him much better. Some more sort of contemporary poetry. We've got The Arctic by Don Patterson. I think this is his most recent poetry collection. I've been keeping an eye out for his 40 sonnets, but just haven't picked up a copy of that yet. But I got this for the time being. I read his collection Rain earlier in the year and really enjoyed it. Then next up we have, I think that's Reconnaissance by Carl Phillips. I think I recognise his name principally because he, at least for a time, was one of the editors for Poetry magazine. And I think I've heard him speaking in a few podcasts and things. And so it was just a name that I kind of recognised. I might have read him in some magazines and things. So I sort of picked this up when I saw it, but it's just been sitting around on the bookcase for some time. A similar case with this one. This is Maurice Riordan, Shoulder Tap. Again, a poet I sort of discovered through podcasts and sort of enjoyed a few individual poems that I found in magazines, and just took me ages really to pick up a collection. So this is a relatively recent collection from Maurice Riordan. And then a similar case to Andrew Marvell and to Wordsworth, Paradise Lost by John Milton. Oh, it doesn't want to focus on Satan there. Let me try and adjust it. There we go. Yeah, I've never read Paradise Lost in its entirety. I've read selections in anthologies, and I've enjoyed the selections that I read. So I'd really like to read Paradise Lost in its entirety. Next up, we have Elizabeth Jennings' new selected poems. I was going to read this recently, but picked up Emily Dickinson instead. So Emily Dickinson kicked her out of the way. But eventually I will read some more Elizabeth Jennings. Another contemporary poet, I picked up this collection because I'd heard a lot about it when it first came out, and I sort of saw it all over Instagram, and I just saw a lot of publicity for it, lots of people talking about it. And when something like that happens with a book, I tend to take a step back and just wait. And I'm not necessarily waiting for any dissenting voices or anything like that. I'm just waiting for it to quieten down so that I can read it and hopefully not be too influenced by all the noise that's been going on about it. So that's the kind of aim. We'll see how it goes. The collection in question is 3 poems by Hannah Sullivan. An interesting Faber edition. I've seen them do this for a few other poets where I think because of the line length of some of the poems, they've sort of changed the proportion of the book. So it's a little squarer, which I find quite cool. So we'll see what that's like. Another classic poet that I've read selections from, and I'm just hungry for more, and that's Gerard Manley Hopkins. So I've got his poems and prose. So I'm hoping that this is more or less everything by Hopkins. So we'll see whether that's the case. 2 more to go. We have R.S. Thomas, The Collected Poems, 1945 to 1990. This is a poet that my dad really loves, and I was reading a book called The Lives of the Poets, which is a survey of poetry in English from medieval times to the late 1990s. And in the chapter that dealt with R.S. Thomas, I was really intrigued by the way he talked about Thomas's development as a poet. He was saying that he was relatively conventional for the time as he started, And then he started stripping his poetry down, the writer of this book, Michael Schmidt, he compared what Thomas was doing to some of the later cantos by Ezra Pound, which I've read sort of selections from again. I don't think the cantos in their entirety will be on a in a video like this anytime soon. Um, but I'm really intrigued to see what R.S. Thomas's development will be as a poet. And again, he's a Welsh poet, a very important Welsh poet that I've read selections from. One of my, one of my dad's favourite poets as well, and so I would just love to spend some more time with him, and um, hopefully I won't be waiting too long before I do. And then finally, again, one I've probably shown before on the channel. It's a novel in verse, and so normally I have certain sort of placeholders for what I'm reading because I read multiple books at once, and so I tend to try and have one novel or at least work of fiction, maybe one work of non-fiction, and then one book of poetry. And narrative poetry it can be difficult. I'm reading the Divine Comedy at the moment, and I'm not sure whether to count it for the poetry I want to be reading or for the fiction I want to be reading. And as it turns out, I'm now reading a non-fiction, yet another poetry book, and yet another fiction book. And so I've just sort of exploded, and I'm reading loads of books at once. And I feel like when I try to read this, something similar will happen because I won't be sure whether to class it as poetry or as as a narrative book. So whether to put it in my little pigeonhole for fiction, I really don't need to overthink it. But there you go. But the book in question is The Golden Gate by Vikram Seth, which has been around for quite some time. I think from the 1990s, something like that. I was under the impression that it was much newer, just because it's seen around everywhere. Yeah, I think it's from the 90s, and so again, just one I'd like to get to, and I haven't read many, as more modern writers would put it, novels in verse. I've read, sort of classic epic poems, which are basically the same thing. But I'm very intrigued to see what it's like, how that kind of form works in a modern setting. It was something I was starting to try and explore around the time I was leaving university. And so it's a thread I'd quite like to pick up again. And that's it. They're my 16 books that I'd like to read relatively slowly, that now have been placed, let me show you, on a very precarious looking pile. But for now, that's everything. So thank you very much for watching. And please let me know if you have read any of these poets, what you think of them, if you love them, if you hate them. Yeah, I'll be curious to know. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.